Joseph, our Spanish pastor, and Pastor Ethan, our youth pastor. We're going to wrap up the short series, guys, that we were talking about last month on testimony. We're talking about the way to have a testimony that actually achieves the third step, which is what we're looking at tonight. We started with the biblical testimony, went on to a consistent testimony to complete and finish where we are now, an influential testimony. I had said the last time we were talking about testimony that what good is an influential testimony, Joseph, if it's not a biblical one? Ethan, I'd also said that really you're not going to have an influential testimony if it's not consistent. So the first two that we've already discussed are really not only necessary but foundational for getting to this third one in a way that actually accomplishes God's will, God's plan, God's glory. So we're not going to repeat the conversation we had about a biblical testimony, but essentially we discussed the fact that a Christian needs to have a righteous, sanctified, moral life that evidences the fruit of the Spirit and the character of God. Then, if you are consistent in that testimony, faithful, balanced, and just, you have the opportunity to begin influencing people. Ethan, I want to start with you tonight on a question I think that you probably have heard before. How long does someone need to be at a ministry before they can really start seeing influence? Let's talk about a youth pastor with teenagers, since that is your role. How long before a youth pastor can expect to see influence in teenagers, and how long did you experience in your life before you start seeing that here?
I believe generally it takes 2 or 3 years just to know people. If I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 years just to get to know people, not just at a surface level, but at like the level where you can find out, okay, what are their needs, how can I meet them, and then to actually really be able to influence, it's like 3 to 5 years, right? Something like that.
And why would that be? Why do you think?
Because when people allow you to influence them, they're giving you a piece of their heart.
And why is it you can get to know someone in a year if you spend every day with them?
Correct.
So why is it 3 to 5 if you potentially could, spend overload time with them within a year? I do still think it takes longer than a year, even if you are spending a lot of time with them to really influence. Why would that be the case?
Whether it's on purpose or in the back of their mind, I think people value, the idea of consistency. I like to say the word faithfulness. There's lots of people who are good talkers, and people know that there's salesmen out there, and they don't want to be sales pitched. They want to know if you're actually who you say you are, and the only way to tell that is with time.
Joseph, you are many things, one of which is a therapist, and you deal a lot with young men and women. I would imagine adults as well, who are consistently having trauma due to people in and out of their lives and causing more harm by coming and going than if they never were there to begin with. Would you have any thoughts on that topic as far as to truly influence in a positive way, you need to be there long term?
Well, yeah, I think Pastor Ethan talked about consistency, but there's that human nature of trust, right? Do I buy in yet? And obviously with trauma, it's a little different. There's layers that automatically impede that ability to buy in. But again, in order to bypass personalities, life experiences, philosophies, views on life, you have to consistently connect with that person. You necessarily have to have conversations with them, but you're supposed to have conversations with substance, because you need to go through that process of buying in, because there's a trust factor that comes in just by human nature.
So why is it, guys, that so many pastors are leaving within 3 years if right at the 3-year mark, which I would agree is 3 to 5, right at the 3-year mark is when they're beginning to see influence? Why are they leaving at 2, 2, 3? Ethan, what do you think?
Because it'd be like farming, but you don't get to harvest after 2 years.
So what's happening
right.
that's causing them to leave if they're just getting to the point where they start receiving the payoff, the payout?
Well, I think a lot of these things is just discouragement, or lack of patience, or maybe just discouragement. It is hard to work hard for 2 years, and then you think at the end of your 2 years, if you're not focused on, again, if you're not driven by the right things to do what you're doing, then at the end of 2 years, even if there's good things coming in, if you're in a healthy mindset, at the best you're going to get out of that is, this is all I get. Well, no, it's just starting. You have to stay a little longer. But yeah, so I think that's what it is.
Joseph, when it comes to families, it is so much more important that we are consistent and biblical for the influence to really take place. But here's the problem. Once you are in the life of a child within 3 to 5 years, you've already established consistently what kind of person you are. And if it wasn't biblical the first 3 to 5, it is really hard to do an about face with a child who's now 5 to 7. The influence has already started because you've already had those years, and now you want to change who you are. Why is it so hard for kids to accept the change of a parent, mom, dad, older sibling, when they've seen how they were for the last 5 years?
And that's due to just God's creation. We are pattern beings, and the foundation of knowledge or experience for a child, they're natural, organic, picking it up as you go, as opposed to someone who already has a framework of mind and thoughts. A child actually picking up the information they're receiving as they get older. So you talk about a child who's 3, 5, 7, what they're actually doing every morning is actually picking up, receiving feedback of what's around them. So to completely rewire that thought process, to start all over, they are already attached to the image that they seen 3 or 5 years ago.
I think a lot of parents are hoping that they will influence their kids when they are teenagers. What do they fail to recognize, Joseph? They're looking for the influence as teenagers. What are they missing?
That their personality, the way they process, the way they view the world has already been molded and shaped and created by their parents.
By who, them? They're thinking, I'm going to influence you when you're 12. The job's already been done. The child who you have in your house at 5, 6, and 7 years old is essentially now molded in your image as a parent, whether you like it or not. Can there be, Joseph, a change? If a parent recognizes my earlier years with my child, I wasn't there for them like I should. The influence wasn't healthy. It wasn't biblical. It was emotional. It was unhealthy, even slightly toxic. What advice can you give a parent who wants to see change, but it's after the kid's like 7 years old?
It's kind of similar to what Ethan was saying. You have to have realistic expectations. For that to happen, can there be a change? Absolutely. God's creation, God's biology, the brain itself creates new neurons, which creates opportunities to attach through what? Through connection and love. So God's creation is already willing to reconnect with someone, even if you change. However, it's not going to happen overnight. So number one is have realistic expectations. That
realistic expectations.
Your 12 or 13 is not going to change in the next month or 3 months or the next year. There is a process for that child to buy in, question, right, what they've learned. And actually, there's a possibility they may look at you as someone who has just changed up on them. So like, hold on, who is this? Everything you taught me, is this real? And so depending on the child, they can actually view the parent or the caregiver as someone who is an imposter. And that's what that comes normally.
Ethan, this is your first youth group. You came here first time. You have a lot of friends. They've moved around. As a child, teenager, I assumed you had more than one youth pastor. How do teenagers process new youth pastors coming in every 2 years?
Sad story. I never had a youth pastor going.
Oh,
down.
my goodness. That is sad. That is sad. Okay. No, not here, guys.
I never had one. I don't know
All
what
right,
it's
tell
like.
us from your experience with other guys in the ministry you've talked to over the last 6 or so years since college.
Well, so quick story on my background. I never had like my own youth pastor. I was lucky enough to be around other youth groups where they had youth pastors and they all like were there for a long time.
That's impressive. That is not
and actually one of them, he was a youth pastor like 5 or 6 years before I went to youth group, before I was youth group age, and he stayed at the same church just now, like a month or two ago, being the lead pastor of his church.
Wow.
So
that'd have been like 15, 20 years of being a youth pastor at the same place.
Yes. So
wow,
which is
impressive.
Yeah. Now, so that's a good thing. Now on the back side of that, I guess on the front end of this now, how do teens react? Well, excuse me. They at least at like when I first came here, we've talked about that before. Like the turnover ratio.
You were seeing
huge.
The evidence of what had happened from other people before you.
Right. So, I'm not going to take time. I'm not going to take time to know you. You're going to be on 2 years, or you're just using this for the next place you're going to be at in 2 years.
Did you sense that's what the teenagers felt about you, that you're going to stick around?
Yeah, 100%.
How about the parents?
Parents were a little different, I feel, because of I don't think I did enough to share my heart with them, but I did enough for like at least a couple of them to feel like, okay, like he actually does want to be here long term. When I came in, while there was no really true, looking back, I didn't really have any true direction or vision for youth ministry. I had lots of big dreams and ideas of what seeing the area, what it could be, and even though I guess it was directionless passion, at least the parents could sense that there was passion to do something, and that it would take a little bit of time for me to get there. So.
Okay, so here we are, guys in the audience. No pastors or youth pastors in the audience. We got men who have people in their lives. And I'm looking out here, most of you guys have children in your lives, whether they are grandchildren, nieces, nephews, your own children, or students at this school. The few of you, or the maybe one or two that do not have children in your lives to influence, you've got other people in your lives to influence, other men and women your age, whether because you work for them or because they are your friends. So everyone in this room has someone that you are hoping to influence. So Joseph, let's start this conversation of what needs to happen. If we have a biblical testimony, we've established that. If we are consistent, because how can you influence if you are not showing that you will stick around? Then how do you lock in that final phase of influence? How do you bring it home? How do you round the bases and get the point? All right, let's talk about that. I think there are 3 necessary parts of influence. The first one is love. That I think, Joseph, you actually mentioned it earlier. You said that love is a big part of influence. I think sacrifice as well, and then finally truth. Now, truth is also part of the biblical side of the influence and having a biblical foundation of truth, but we're going to bring it to the influential side as well, and that is when you are influencing someone, are you using truth or are you using manipulation, emotions? Is there some kind of game you're playing to get them to see your way, or are you trying to truly just use truth and let God do his work? So let's start in Jude. There's only one chapter in Jude, and verse 22. The Bible says, and of some have compassion, making a difference. Now, that word compassion is not love. I believe that compassion is a form of love. It is the emotional side of love. Love, 1 Corinthians 13, is purely action. It is a choice of the will to treat others well and to desire their success. All of 1 Corinthians 13 falls under you treat them well and you want their success. I think you can summarize it in that way. That's love. Compassion is now the feeling of caring for someone. They are not the same thing. You know what I've noticed in God's word? We are commanded to love. We are not commanded to have compassion. We are encouraged to have compassion. Jesus illustrates compassion. In Jude, we're told when you have compassion, you can truly help someone. Because if you just love them, treat them well, want their success, but don't care for them, if you're around them long enough, Joseph, something's going to happen. Either they will notice you don't care for them, or you'll start caring for them. But if you're around them consistently and you just never care for them, they're going to pick up on it eventually. Wouldn't you agree, Joseph? Even children,
yeah, 100%.
maybe especially children, will pick up on it, that you show me kindness, but I don't think you actually care about me. Now, Joseph, what do you think is more likely to endear a human being to you? 1 Corinthians 13, love, or Jude 1:22, compassion? If you had to choose one or the other, I'm not saying which one is best. I'm not saying which one is biblical. The Bible says love is the greatest commandment. We already know the answer to that. I'm asking from a therapist's point of view, let's talk about children. Which one is more likely to endear a child to you? The compassion or the love? They're both needed. They're both necessary. Which one?
And just to confirm, when you think about compassion, you think about someone outwardly caring for someone.
It's actual legitimate care. It's not fake. It's not contrived. You truly care for that person. That care may not manifest itself in love because maybe the person, let's say I care. I care for this. I care for Joe. I care for Joe. But I lack self-control. I get angry all the time. I yell at Joseph. I don't treat Joseph well because I have my own issues. I want Joseph's success, but I also want my own, so I envy Joseph's success, but I truly care about you. You see that. There are moments where that shines. You don't doubt that I care about you, but as an adult, you probably say it's a toxic relationship, but you know that I care about you. We're talking about children, though, who don't have the adult ability to perceive toxic relationships. What do you think?
Children are going to perceive what's presented to them. And so children have to see in our word intentionality to care for them. Because at the end of the day, they are a clean slate. And so just telling them that you care for them, but not going through that experience of caring for them, they can't come up with that ability to actually believe in that. So they have to believe, and they only see that if they outwardly express them consistently.
I agree with you, but Joseph, how many friendships with children are toxic? The kids do care for each other, but they're not evidencing love for each other, dating or friendship. But man, they're inseparable. They're not showing love to each other, but they care about each other more than they care about their own family. Why?
Well, the love is, Repeat that
No,
question?
biblical love.
Yeah,
We're talking
yeah,
First
okay,
Corinthians
okay.
biblical
Correct.
love.
So,
It doesn't exist in a lot of these friendships
Correct.
and romantic
well,
relationships.
that's the game changer. Now, and I was going around because when I think about the biblical love, that's the only love that exists that actually does not have conditions. So regardless of anything, regardless of it's not predicated on what you present. It's not predicated on your circumstance or your spiritual condition. A biblical love says, I accept you the way you are because you meet the criteria that's made on the cross.
But I want your success, which means let's get you to a better place.
Correct.
Accept how you are, but let's get you to
Correct.
success.
It's not acceptance of your situation, acceptance of your soul, that you're worthy enough.
But my question was, in a child, which one is more likely to bring influence? Biblical love or compassion? Which one is a child more likely to quickly respond to?
Biblical love.
You think so?
I think so.
Ethan, what do you think? Get your mic. Get your mic.
Sorry, thank you.
Biblical love or
Yeah,
compassion?
I'm still trying to wrap my mind about like the differences you're trying to point out here.
Okay.
So,
I'm pointing out compassion is purely emotional.
Correct.
All right.
okay.
Purely emotional attachment,
Yeah.
where the child feels the emotional attachment, knows it exists,
Gotcha.
or the action of the will, where the person says, biblically, I want your success unconditionally.
I think a child is more apt to feel compassion.
So we have love, compassion. Now,
But-
Joseph, we're welcome to disagree here,
Yeah.
because I think compassion too.
I agree. I was having trouble separating what you were
Yeah.
saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on the same page.
yeah.
Then. Because
Yes,
look, I
yes.
see kids
Correct.
responding to the compassion and care of their friends who are anything but biblical love
Correct.
faster and longer than they do to the biblical love of their parents and their teachers. And I'm saying that from experience here at Mid-State Christian Academy. We've got teachers who show daily biblical love. We want these kids' success. We are sacrificing for them. We unconditionally love them. And yet these kids are influenced more by their friends because their friends truly care about them. And yet you see how their friends treat each other, and you're like, this is not a healthy relationship. Well, at least they care. It would be the response. At least my friends care. That's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense.
I
Yeah.
believe that the human condition responds strongly to the emotional, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, yeah, agreed.
Compassion is the emotional. Like it or not, wrong or right, that's what I see, especially with children. Adults are the same way. I think not so much with adults. I think adults have been hurt too many times through the emotional experience that if they're smart, they begin to recognize the value of the biblical love over the compassion. But at what age that happens,
So they're not there yet.
it changes for everyone. My point is, it doesn't have to be one or the other. That's the point I'm trying to make. But if it does have to be one, biblically we're required to show love. But if you're really trying to influence, do not put aside the power of compassion. Why did God not command us to have compassion on others? Why is it not a command to care about others? What do you think, Joseph?
That's a tough question. You're stumping me today.
Here's what I think.
Yeah.
It's an emotional decision. And our emotions,
It's not pretty good. True.
God is not commanding us to feel some way about someone, because how can you force that? You can't force it. I believe there are ways to nourish it, to encourage it. I believe the best way to have compassion on someone, to care for someone. Because look, can you force yourself to care for someone who hates you and someone you just dislike? You can foster it. Can you force it? I don't think you can. I don't think you can force it. There are decisions you can make to encourage it. The first decision you can make to encourage it is to love them, right? Love is the greatest way, first way, to encourage the compassion, biblical, healthy compassion. The second way, which love would include, is forgive. Especially if it's someone that dislikes you, forgiveness needs to be included for you to care about. How can you care about someone to which you are bitter against, right? I don't think you can have those two emotions strongly, and they're both strong emotions, successful cohabiting, right? All right, so love, forgiveness. Then I think the third step, in my experience, in my opinion, is literally asking God to care for them through you. Essentially recognizing that your compassion is limited to your humanity, limited to your fallen nature. Begging God to let his godly, ever-flowing compassion that he has for everyone, even our worst enemy, if we had one, God has compassion as much for them as for anyone else. Saying, God, I don't have it, take it and give it to them through me. I just want to be the free-flowing, you might say, conduit of your compassion to others. If we turn compassion into something other than what it is, which is, again, an emotional caring for someone, then it's a decision you can make and should make at any time. Mm-hmm. It's not. It's not love. Compassion is not love. When you lack compassion, your love for that person is affected. Mm-hmm. Can you truly have a healthy love for your spouse if you don't have compassion for them? No, which is why marriages are falling apart, but the husband says, but I love my wife. And she says, you may, I don't believe it, but I know one thing, you don't care about me. And then what she's saying? She's saying, you love me. You may even have 1 Corinthians 13. You may actually be not jealous of me. You may be patient with me. You may never yell at me, but where's the care? You stopped caring about me 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. A romantic relationship requires more than just the outward action of patience and kindness and desiring their success. A romantic relationship requires the care. And Joseph, babies, infants, do not process the 1 Corinthians 13 love, but what do they process?
Yeah, it's that felt experience.
It's the felt
It's the
compassion.
emotion, because they're not there yet. They're not developmentally there yet. And so that's why, if you guys know me, I'm always say emotions aren't facts. However, for a child at that age, they experience emotions as factual. If there's an absence of that, they are not loved. And so, yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to figure it out because the biblical love sets up the compassion.
It does. It sets it up. Now, can you follow the commandment of loving someone and influence them while lacking compassion? I think your influence will be severely limited. There still can be some influence. Let's be honest. A pastor of a church of 1,000 people, how can he have compassion for every 1,000? He can't. He doesn't know them. They don't know him. But he can show them love by sacrificing for the church, sacrificing for the congregation, the choices that he makes, the example that he sets. He can still influence them. But the real influence in a church that size is probably coming from the life group leaders, the connection groups. The people on a personal level are probably influencing that person more than the pastor is. The best the pastor is doing is probably giving truth in a way that's easy to receive because it's coming from a guy they respect and honor. Not necessarily a guy that has compassion on them. It's the truth given through love that is really influencing, and it does. But true one-on-one influence, I think, requires compassion. Can you have love without it? I think you can. I don't think you can have healthy romantic or relational love without compassion. But you can have a general love for humanity, a general love for a stranger, a general love for even someone you know fairly well, while not having deep compassion for them, because the emotional connection hasn't had time to foster. There's a wall up, a variety of reasons why the compassion may not be there. But Jude 1:22 tells us and reminds us that the final step of love is not just the 1 Corinthians 13, but the follow through with the emotional care. That's when the influence really has traction. And in my personal life, I'm now 40 years old, I did really well 1 Corinthians 13. For the first 10 years of my ministry, guys, I was good at it. I saw it. I knew the mission. I knew the expectation. I loved God enough to not want to dishonor him. I loved people, 1 Corinthians 13, well. I did not see a lot of people influenced by me personally until I hit my 30s and started recognizing it's more than just love. They need to see the emotional care attached to the love. Once my eyes were open to that, the opportunity, the ability to influence just multiplied many times over. Joseph, I'll give your thoughts on love, then we're going to move on to the next one. But what do you think?
No, I agree with 100%. Matter of fact, even in my line of work, we're not even required to look at empathy. Empathy is a big buzzword. You have to have empathy. Clinically, we look for compassion, because compassion actually creates actions towards them. Compassion actually, through those actions, allows people to build a secure, healthy attachment to the person. Because you're right, they don't just sit with what you think they're saying to you, they sit with what they're seeing. So that makes sense.
And feeling. We
Correct.
are feelers.
Yes.
And influence is better served when the feeling is healthy and positive. And truthful and loving, not manipulative, because you can use compassion to manipulate someone.
Correct.
And also you can have compassion but be toxic in your love, and so they are influenced by you but not in a healthy way.
Emotional care is a thing. I think a lot of times we gloss over the fact with just truth and knowledge, and this is what I'm going to teach you. I'm going to lecture what we should do. Listen, especially young children, focus on children, right? all they experience, even through their own body, is just feelings, 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 feelings. So if that's done well, that's healthy, then they're at a point where they can find and seek connection.
Why is it that teenagers will tell their parents, "You don't love me," when it's obvious the parent does? What are they actually saying?
You don't care about me.
You don't care about me. But they are defining love by what?
Care.
By the compassion, by care. That's what teenagers do. That's what children do. That's what a lot of adults do who don't understand the Bible. You can then say, no, look at 1 Corinthians 13. What part of 1 Corinthians 13 am I not showing you? You know, they're not going to accept it because to them, feeling is more important than seeing. They want to see with their emotions. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying what it is. Ethan, what do you think?
I mean, out of all these three things here that we're going to talk about tonight, if you have time to get them.
We're actually not. We're going to have
Yeah.
to continue this conversation
Loving-
next week.
Yeah, so love, sacrifice, and truth. I was trying in my mind, as on my way here, like what do these do for the idea of influence? And love love actually does a lot. Like love is doesn't just answer the question how do we influence people. It also influences like the what and why. So why am I influencing these people? Oh, because I'm influencing them.
Yes.
Because I
want their
influencing-
success. Remember,
Right.
love is treating someone well
Yeah.
and wanting their success.
So it's not just what we do, it's why we do it. It also influences how I do it, right? So if you're going to, again, this idea of influential has to work for a Christian in any space, whether you're a ministry leader or at home or whatever. And so love is the single most powerful thing on there, as long as it's biblical love, godly love, because it directs so much, not just what we do, directs how we do it, why we do it, all three things, which is huge, especially for people who don't have a lot of bandwidth in their minds to of everything else in life. Like, what can I do? Well, there's only one thing you can focus on is you're trying to influence people. Focus on love. So.
All right, let's. We're not going to go to sacrifice and truth. We don't have time. We take the last few minutes and continue this conversation. Joseph, young woman is in a courthouse, and the man who murdered her parents is up on the stand, and you are going to counsel her after the man is guilty, is going to prison. She's coming to you with trauma. And you were going to tell her, you must care for this man, right? That's what you're going to tell her, right?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I'm so glad. I was setting you up for failure. I'm so glad you saw it. What is the danger, Joseph, of saying you need to care about this man who murdered your parents?
Well, it's just ignoring the whole emotional component, her own human nature of it. It's threatening to who she is. It seems like you're not compassionate and you're not validating her experience. And so you become actually a threat to them. And so it's saying, hey, I'm going to force you when they're not there yet. That seems wrong. They're not prepared for that.
But what can you say outside of the emotional? What's the first truths you'd bring her to? This young woman whose parents are murdered by this man. What's the first truths you'd bring her to?
Talk about biblical truth?
That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
We're Christians. What's the biblical truths you'd bring her to?
Exactly that. But that's a lot. I've actually had that experience personally. And at that point, it could be the care for them, where God cares for that person through an experience.
All right.
It could be...
So then that you are cared for.
You are cared for.
Okay, not that you need to care for this guy, but
No,
God
not at
cares
all.
for you.
No.
You're not forgotten. Almost one of the first ones I would do. It's interesting you say that. That makes sense. But I would be bringing this girl to a point of forgiveness as fast as I could, because the longer bitterness sets in, the worse she's going to be. Forgiveness and essentially letting God take the justice and the vengeance on him rather than herself.
That's the goal. Because murder is such a severe, intense thing, forgiveness is so down there. And so I prepare them for the goal.
Okay.
Right? And so that goal is exactly that.
Let's say 2 years down the road, the girl says, Joseph, thank you so much for your help. I've forgiven the guy. I'm letting it go. Are you then going to say, all right, but now let's work on you caring about the man? Would you take her then 2 years later?
It depends what the forgiveness is. The goal, I can't force anyone to care for someone.
Okay, exactly. And that's where I'm at. I have spoken with young girls who have been traumatized by men who have mistreated them physically. I've spoken with these girls, Joseph. They've, not going to say outright raped, although some of them have been. They've been mistreated by men. I would never tell the girl, well, until you care for that guy, until you have compassion for that guy, you're not right with God. I wouldn't say that. I don't believe that. I would take her down the path of what you said. Well, God loves you. God has a plan for you. And forgiveness. You gotta let God take the justice. Let God have the vengeance. He can do much better with that person than you can. Let it, you got to give it to God's hands. And then if I have achieved that with that young girl, I'm not going to go down the road of you need to care for that guy someday. I just don't see it in Scripture. I don't think it's required. And that's what I'm trying to tell you guys, is that I believe love is required. And love does bring a level of influence. The people you do not care for, you won't influence. But here's the thing. Does this girl need to influence the guy who murdered her parents? She does not. God can use someone else to influence that guy.
Correct.
God just needs this young girl to reflect his love. God doesn't need this girl to reflect his compassion to that guy. Someone else can do that. But God does want all believers to reflect his love to everyone. And then some of us are put up in a situation set up for success where we can and should have compassion, and then we can truly influence that person. But would it be healthy for this young girl, force her in a situation where she has to influence this guy, that if she's not prepared ever in her life emotionally to do that? More harm than good.
And it happens a lot, Russ. I just hold on to this because I've seen it. I work through this field. I work with when it comes to sexual abuse, sexual trauma. There's a lot of churches that do try to force that person
The care and the compassion.
to carry because they say that is a step. That's one of the steps for you to get right with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I had to just come back to that because you're right. And usually those are people that never come back again, lose faith, or believe it or not, the way the body is set up feels equally violated again because you bring them back to that place. We have to be very careful where we understand where the agent of change and forgiveness goes to the Lord, and all we could do is what you mentioned. So I just want to just say that because it happens a lot.
Okay, so then let's end with this. Do we need to have strong influence on everyone in our life?
No.
We do not. Is it even feasible? Is it practical? Is it possible? It's not possible. You need to figure out who you can influence by, can I care about this person? All right, if you can, you run to that one. You influence that person. If you cannot, then your job is this. Don't make God or Christians look bad. That's all you got to do. Just love them so that God and other believers don't look bad. You're setting another believer up to influence where you cannot because you just can't bring yourself to emotionally care for this person. Okay, God will use someone else as long as you don't cut that person's legs out from under them as a Christian by showing hatred and anger rather than love. Ethan, any final thoughts?
That was a very 0-100 example there, but I think it was encapsulated very well. Like love is something that we're commanded to do. Care is something that can, and probably should be an outpouring of that foundation of love. But at the end of the day, God doesn't require it, and so we should never force people to do that. To care.
Okay, well, we spent a lot of time talking about it, but I feel like it was a good discussion. We will continue this conversation next week, talking about sacrifice and truth. We'll see if we can complete both of those and wrap up this little series on how to influence others in a positive, healthy, biblical way. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next Sunday night for this last and final part.